hello, here we go. Inclusion and employee engagement. What's what we're here to talk about? Mainly Brooke's going to talk about it, and I'm just here to kind of ask some questions and hopefully make the conversation flow well. But excited to be here. We're going to give everyone a couple more minutes as they roll in. Just a couple of reminders. If you're in the chat, make sure to change your setting to everyone and not just host and panelists, because if it's just host and panelists, only Brooke and I are going to be able to see what your questions are. But if you want to ask questions, it's nice for everyone to be able to see that. So just make sure you're changing that to everyone instead of just host and panelists. And at any time during the conversation that we're going to be having, if you have questions, please put them in the chat, put them in the QA, and we're going to try and answer as many as we can. But just like, don't hesitate to ask any questions. That's what we're here for. This is kind of a safe space, all here to learn together and talk about things. There are no dumb questions. There are no stupid questions. We're all here just kind of like learn together and kind of, start this journey of DEI work and inclusion and all that kind of great stuff. So excited to have this conversation, excited to answer questions, excited for you all to participate in the conversation as well.
Be a good one. The great thing about DEI, which I always say, is that if anyone had the ultimate answer, I would be out of a job. So there's so many learnings, there's so many ways that we get to be able to educate each other. So really excited for that. Please feel free to chat in the chat box, build off of some of the things that we'll be talking about, because I'm super interested to hear folks' perspectives as well.
All right. I think that like kind of transitions really well into introductions. So I'm going to turn it over to Brooke to do her introduction because I'm not going to do it correctly. So I'm going to let her talk about herself because she'll be able to give you all the good juicy bits.
I love it in podcasts, like when you hear someone introduce them and they're like, I think they were in this movie and blah, blah, blah. So yes, I will introduce myself. Hi, everyone. My name is Brooke. My pronouns are she, her. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, I'm located just outside of Toronto, so Treaty 13 area, traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credits. And I'm really happy to have this discussion. In my role, I'm a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant and trainer. So really what I do is just take the informational, take that data, those insights that we work with at Diversio, and then build it into the aspirational. So thinking about how do we implement strategies? How do we build education and knowledge around DEI? So really excited to have those combos today. And I can pass it to Noah.
Right. No, I mean, if you've joined these webinars, you know who I am. My name is Noah Water. I'm the head of people over here at Gusto. We're all about employee recognition and rewards, but these webinars and these conversations are really our way of trying to facilitate some of the conversations that we think are really important in the world of people and culture and HR today. So, these conversations are really for us to talk to amazing people like Brooke and get their expertise and their unique perspectives on different issues that people like me face every day in the workplace, and all of y'all are dealing with in your workplaces. And so really excited to be able to talk to Brooke about DEI and inclusion and employee engagement and all those good things. So without kind of like further ado, no one wants to listen to what I'm talking about or who I am. Let's talk about our topic today. So let's jump into the things. I'm not going to share my screen anymore because we don't need that. We don't need slides. We're here to have a conversation. As you so aptly put it, let's do it Jimmy Fallon or Oprah style and just chat. Let's just chat here. But so like let's start at the start of where do you start as an organization on this journey of inclusion and employee engagement and DEI, because it's such a big, broad topic. And I think that's the thing that people struggle with the most. Is like, where do I start? There's so many choices and people are afraid they're going to get it wrong. So where do we start, Brooke? How do we start this journey?
Totally. So, I mean, Diversio is a data company in of itself, but aside from that, like wherever you can, always begin with the data. And why is that? Because we need the context to be able to know like how to follow that North Star, right? Like because that language, we hear that a lot. How do we follow our vision? How do we really better understand where we're going in our D&I journey? And it's got to start with the data. It's got to start with having that foundational understanding of what are employees thinking about? What's relevant to them? Do they understand, the values of them and the mission that we're going through? Do they feel like they're represented? Do they feel like they're able to be heard and belong in the organization? Do they feel like they have someone who's invested in their growth? These are just some of the ways that we talk about inclusion metrics, thinking about, career development, thinking about that inclusive culture. Do I belong? Thinking about workplace flex, huge topic coming out of the pandemic. Do folks feel like they can balance their personal obligations with their workplace obligations? These are all things that are all encompassing that really are going to help us understand, us make those steps to move forward to build that inclusive culture that we're all trying really hard to do. But the thing that I tell everyone is that it's going to be unique to your organization. What works for Google may not work for you. So it's really important to hear it from your employees, and that's going to be the best way to start going in the right direction.
Yeah, and I love that you brought that up of like, what's going to work for one company is not going to work for another company. We all kind of have our own unique cultural DNA and all those good things. And you talked about the vision. And so we've got a quick poll for everyone to talk about. Do you have a specific DEI vision for your organization? And so I'm just going to launch this quickly, ask you all to answer this. It is anonymous. Just fill it out. Let us know kind of where are you at in your DEI journey. We talked about how to start. Some of you may have started, some of you may have it on a roadmap somewhere down the line. Some of you might have just be like, no, this is not something we've even talked about because it's a big, scary type of thing. So let's give it another couple minutes. We're about 27 people have answered. Can we get a few more people chiming in?
This is a really good place to start. We always talk about what's the vision, what's the mission, even within D&I, being able to contextualize that, like aka being able to be like, hey, at Diversio, like DEI means this to us. Like at Gusto, DEI means this to us. Like this is really what we mean when we say vision. And that really helps our employees be engaged, right? They can actually participate in what we're trying to build within the organization. So super interested to know how folks are starting to create that within their own orgs.
All right. I think, okay, we're going to tie it up there. We've got about 75% filling it out. So let's end the poll.
We should have like the Jeopardy music. Like,
drum roll, please. All right, here we go. So it looks like most people are working on it. This is something they're actively working on, which is awesome. We've got a couple people that have they've done this. They have a vision, which is amazing. Kudos to you. A few people are no, some people it's on a roadmap, and one person who doesn't know what this is, which is okay. That's what we're here for. We're all learning together. And so let's talk about this. Like, what is the difference between like a DEI vision, a DEI philosophy, a DEI commitment? Are these all different things, or do they all kind of encompassed into one broad statement, sort of manuscript, whatever you want to call it?
This is a good question, honestly. And the way that I think about it, so our vision, again, I use this language, and that's like the consulting curse, but it is that North Star, right? It's the where we're trying to reach. It's the what we're striving for, because we need that, because when we take, a misstep, which is going to happen on our D&I journeys, we need to be able to identify how do we recalibrate, how do we get back to that. And by having that DEI vision statement, it's really helpful when we get into those decision-making things, because we always want to be able to ask ourselves the questions like, is this valid? And is this aligned with our vision? These are the two things that we always want to ask when we're building some of our DEI actions, when we have some of those tough decisions to make, et cetera. A DEI philosophy that's probably a bit more connected to, our ethos, like what we think is right. And that one actually, in my opinion, is going to differ from person to person. We're all going to have different philosophies around DEI, and our company may be really aligned with that, but it just may be different. But I think that our vision is probably going to be really deeply connected to those values. And then lastly, the commitment is similar to what we think of the mission statement. It's the how. How are we actually doing this for our team, for our, our stakeholders or customers or clients, whatever they may be, and for a community. So the DEI commitment is the how. How are we doing it? What are we doing? That action that is connected to what we do at our organization. So that would be my definition of those three.
I mean, I love it. And I think I like how you kind of broke that down, because I've never actually heard anyone differentiate between the three in all of the blog posts and newsletters and articles that I've read. It's always one or the other, or they talk about one separated from the others. And so thanks for kind of breaking that out and sort of what those three different things are. And kind of it sounds to me like you usually want to start with that vision statement of this is where we want to be, and kind of work your way down towards the commitments. And then in your first sort of comments and introduction, you talked a lot about data. And I feel like that commitment piece is where that data really starts to play in. And so I'd love to learn a little bit more about how do you tie your commitments to your data? How do you communicate that out to your team and maybe external stakeholders as well, if down the line at some point?
Totally. So when we think about I've been doing this data switch. I don't know why my brain cannot pick which one it wants to say. When we think about data, it's really having those metrics to be able to let us know, are we being accountable to our vision, right? So when we think about inclusion at Diversio, for example, we're thinking about it in those 5 ways that I mentioned. So we're thinking of inclusive culture. Do employees feel like they're part of the team? Do they feel like they're able to meaningfully contribute? We think about fair management. Do folks feel that their managers are objective and that they're fair, and that they allow employees to advance and celebrate them for their hard work? Do we have career development? Do folks have access to networks? Like I mentioned, do they have mentors and sponsors within the organization that create opportunities for them and invest in their growth? Workplace flexibility. Do we have those flexible working options? Can folks balance work, life, and find a harmony within that without any kind of undue stress? And then lastly, and this is the most significant one, is our workplace safe? Do employees not experience any form of harassment or bias? Is there accountability within the organization? So when we start off with those, we really get a good picture of where our strengths are, where those areas that we want to fortify. We want to actually make sure that we have mechanisms in place that are going to make sure that this is something that is upheld in our organization, because we're already doing it really well. And as we grow, as we bring in new people, we want to make sure that that is held. And then, of course, we're going to have those areas of growth, those pain points, so to speak, where we know we can do a little bit better, where we need to invest some programming and some time around building a strategy of how we can address this within our own organization. So I think that that's a really important part of engagement, because when we identify those two things, we want to make sure that employees know that they're heard too. So I saw a stat that 85 of employees globally are not engaged. So that means that majority of the workforce around the world is either viewing their workplace negatively, or they're just doing what they have to do to get throughout the day. And that's a really dismal stat. And I think a lot of it comes from the fact that we are not giving our employees the opportunity, and particularly when we're talking about D&I, to be a part of that vision that we're all striving for. So our good friends at Deloitte even say that there's a statistical significant relationship between D&I practices and employee engagement at work, because it leads to trust. When we actually communicate that data that we're collecting, when we actually communicate those small steps that we're doing in our journey, it really helps our employees understand that they are being able to meaningfully contribute in an honest way, so their input means something, it's not just going out into the void, as I say, and that there's accountability, so something is actually happening out of it, even if it's small. So these are really important parts of the data collection being key to be able to start, but also the communication to make sure that we have the opportunity to all be a part of the vision that is going to be really connected to the values of the organization as well.
Yeah, I love that you talk so much about that communication piece, especially that internal communication, because I think that's one of the most difficult parts to get right or do well. And I think it comes with a responsibility to also admit failure when failure happens, because it's going to happen. Let's all be honest. We all make mistakes every single day. And so like, I think that's the part. And I think I struggle with this, and I know other HR professionals struggle with it, was like, especially around DEI, is like, when you fail at it, what do? You don't want to, it's almost hard to talk about it openly, because it's like, oh, we're failing at this really critical thing. So we talked about this a little bit when we were prepping for this, is like creating that safe space for HR people to also talk about this. Is like, what does that look like? Because often we might not have that in our own organizations, where we can talk about our own failures because we're the only person, or we're the most senior person, or whatever. But how do you see those HR communities kind of coming into play to help the broader DEI conversation?
So, I'm sure we've all seen this, like Brene Brown, love her. And we talk a lot about psychological safety, which is key in inclusive culture, right? And that is really deeply connected to folks being able to feel that they can take risks and express themselves in the workplace. And that is actually really deeply connected to the D&I work, in that we need to be able to know that if we take a misstep, or if something is well intentioned but it doesn't pan out, that we have a team, that we have leaders especially, that are going to understand and help us do that recalibration to move forward. So I think that it's really important that we have open conversations about D&I, about sometimes where we're like, is this the best thing? Is this what we do? Because asking those questions, like I mentioned, asking that really key question that I always come back to is that, does this align with our D&I vision, is really what is integral. And sometimes we'll say, you know what, it actually doesn't. Like we missed that. Like we didn't think about how this may not connect with our KPIs. This may not connect with what we're trying to achieve. So, this was a miss here. But again, to think about, okay, how do we make it better? How do we realign ourselves to whatever we're trying to achieve? I think that's the bigger question. And then again, being able to communicate that, hey, we posted this, I don't know, we posted this thing on LinkedIn, and we understand that it really upset some people. And we know that it's because it did not connect to our value of X. But now moving forward, we've thought about it, and we know that because we're trying to achieve Y, this is what we're going to do moving forward. So those are the key things. And even that I would want to see, when we're thinking about being accountable, because even when we think about an apology, right? Like that's exactly what we do. We acknowledge what was wrong. We acknowledge where it was a misstep, and then we think about what we're going to do moving forward. So that's what we always want to see from our organizations, from our leaders, and giving ourselves grace to do that as well. And the humility to say, we make a mistake, but we're also moving forward with this actionable next step.
I love it. And I like that you talk so much about just like talking about the mistakes and the missteps that we're all going to be having, because it's true. None of us are perfect. We're all going to be making these mistakes. And the more you talk about it, the more you normalize it. And like you said, and then it creates a more inclusive culture. And like almost by making these mistakes in your DEI journey and then talking about how you're making these mistakes, even though you're trying to progress, you're making a more inclusive culture, because people can see, oh, it's okay to make a mistake here. It's okay to put myself up on a limb because that person's also making mistakes, and it's not this catastrophic failure that everyone's upset about.
And making space to ask those questions too. Like, there's that quote, like, when you assume, like, you make an ass out of me and you, like assuming really means not asking the questions. And I think that D&I is so connected to that growth mindset, that curiosity to be able to say, is this in alignment with what we want to do? Is this are we forgetting someone here? Are we speaking on behalf of someone? Are we taking up too much space in this conversation? Like, all of these are such key important questions that folks need to have the safety to be able to bring up and share those opinions. And I think that that's really key also to being able to have that workspace where people are engaged, because they can really bring their whole selves and that curiosity to say, hey, like, this is how I'm understanding participating in the vision. And I want to ask this question because it probably is connected to what we may or may not be doing right or wrong.
Oh yeah, making space for people to question. And sometimes it's not good enough to just say that it's okay to question. Sometimes you're going to have to book those meetings and sit down with somebody and just be like, this is what we're thinking, tear it apart. Like, what do you think about it? Like, ask me questions. I'm going to ask you a few pointed questions, and then I want you to ask me questions and give me your feedback. So I think that's the other piece of just like, sometimes you just got to sit down with people and be like, let's have a conversation about this and tell me how I'm not doing this 100%.
I actually have a really good story about this. Like, I think it was like maybe I don't know, maybe it was my second month at Diversio, maybe even within my first. Our director of marketing, he was building a campaign around, like our us achieving our Series A funding. And he had almost like this focus group where he was bringing folks in, and he said that he wanted me to be in it. And, I came in, he showed the campaign, and like, I was like, immediately no. Like, I didn't say it, but like my brain was like, immediately no. And it wasn't that it wasn't well thought through. It wasn't that I totally understood what he was trying to achieve 100%. But I was like, there's something here that I don't believe is connecting to our ethos. Like, the way this campaign is being formed, it's not getting at what our actual call to action is, which is this focus on data and focus on how we can move things forward. It was more focused on, like the negative side on DI, which is the folks who are kind of the naysayers, the resistance, as I like to call them. And I was like, I don't think that's really us. And I was really nervous to say it because I was new to the firm. I think very highly of our director of marketing, and but I was like, I just feel like it's not aligned with the vision. And I said it, and he received it so well. Like, he really appreciated it, and he ended up scrapping the whole idea. We worked together to brainstorm something else, a blog that was really connected to outlining some of the really disappointing statistics around experiences for different folks. But I was like, this is so much more connected to what we want to do, because yes, it's cutting through the noise and really showing people that we've got a problem that we have to deal with, but not in a way that is at the expense of, for example, of certain groups of people, by focusing on the trolls and like some of that negativity. So it was just such a great example to me of being safe enough to have that conversation. And it also, not going out into the void, as I say, not just, me taking those steps to be brave and say something and then it not really being met with anything. He was super accountable to it and was so open. And at first he was like, I disagree. I disagree because XYZ. And I was like, oh, like, I hear you, but XYZ. And it just was a really great conversation and just showed me some of the ways that we can have those conversations with our coworkers who at that time, him and I weren't even close. Like, we were like literally just met each other. But it really built, I think, the trust for me to be able to say, like, I can speak my honest opinion candidly, constructively, of course, and it will be met with accountability and with humility.
That's amazing. And like, I would, there's a couple of questions in the chat and on the Q&A. I promise we'll get there. But I want to ask one thing of like, there's organizations where, you might have those naysayers or the resistance, or those people who, they have an idea and they're going for it. And you have that person who kind of speaks up and says, hey, is this really in line with our DEI vision or what were our values? And sometimes they just kind of get like squashed down, or like you said, just goes out in the void and nothing happens. How do you suggest HR leaders like myself or people leaders who may be kind of fighting against this to try and bring along their executives for the ride of why this is so important. Like just like one or two things that you can arm them with, like to just go in there and be like, you know what, I think it's really important that we really listen to people when they question us and be more accountable to it.
Mm-hmm. So I think my important thing there is always having something to go back to, because that's why we have these business cases. In an ideal world, I would just be like, D&I is important, and people would be like, you're right. But we do have these cases that we go back to, that we say, hey, like, we're accountable to this, we're accountable to our productivity, we're accountable to our profitability, et cetera, et cetera. So connecting this to making sure that we have safe spaces, we are totally accountable to our employees' engagement. And engagement, like I mentioned, is deeply connected to, do our employees feel like they can trust us? Do they feel like when we say that we are going to do something in our D&I practices, that it is going to happen? So I think that bringing that to leadership, saying, hey, like, there was this instance where someone said they voiced their opinion, and it wasn't met with the culture that we're trying to build here. And we really want to make sure that our employee engagement metrics don't drop, that our inclusive culture metrics don't drop, whatever it may be, because we know that this is important to our overall goal of getting to said vision. So I think that it's always bringing it back to a place, and maybe it's the overall company vision. Maybe you don't have your DI vision yet. We saw, like, I think over 50 people are just working on it right now. So maybe it's connecting to a value. If your value is honesty, almost every organization, it's going back to that, saying that person was honest, and we weren't accountable to that. And we have said, it's right here on our website, that is our value. So we already have a misalignment here, and we want to make sure that is appreciated. So that would be my explanation of that, because we always need to have something that is guiding us along the way. I'm really focused on the journey, because without it, D&I would be very, very sad job always, because we're just kind of doing things, we're seeing this constant evolution. But when we can identify our North Star, it really helps us be able to go back to that value, go back to that vision, and say, this is what we're working towards, and this is this tangible thing that we need to be accountable to.
It's amazing. Thank you for that. And I think like you said, tying it back to that core value. And I know a lot of companies are tying those core values also to competencies and career ladders and career pathways. And so you can make it really, really tangible of like, you did not do the thing that you need to do to get to that next stage of your career. I want to jump into a couple of questions. So we have one from somebody from Alacrity, Canada. Can you please give us an example of a DEI vision? So I don't know if you have like a link you can send, or just like a quick 1 or 2 sentence of a good DEI vision, but do you have anything, Brooke, that you can kind of point people towards?
Yeah, actually, I'm like looking it up right now so I don't butcher it. But I think that I use this example in one of my trainings too, because I think that Shopify has a really great DI vision. One of my good friends works at Shopify. And so Shopify's overall vision is to, help entrepreneurs. So when we go into their DI vision, their social impact, it's really saying that our approach to diversity is centered on people, based on research, and creates an organization that reflects the world we live in and the entrepreneurs we build for. So it's really thinking about, again, that vision, the entrepreneurs, and then thinking about an overall way that we can do this within our own vision space. So I think that, and then they go into the different process initiatives, like addressing our systems. So making sure there's thoughtful decisions needed to make commerce better for everyone. I think that these are the kind of building blocks of how we can get to a D&I vision. I think another way is thinking of the ways of working. So almost like a work back plan. If you look at your own company's values, so like I said, I'm just going to name some random ones that I see. Maybe it's honesty, integrity, and empathy. There we go. Those are the big top three. It's thinking about, firstly, how do we contextualize this value? So meaning, what does honesty mean for us at Google? You know, then it goes to the next step, which is, how do I actually do this in my day to day? So what does honesty look like for me as a product manager, for me as a PR coordinator, for me as a engineer? And then the third one is, how do I hold myself accountable to honesty at my workplace? So maybe I hold myself accountable to honesty because we have a 360 review process every 6 months. And this is where I'm able to share my honest feedback. Maybe it's that my manager and I have monthly one-on-ones where I'm able to discuss and they give me that feedback. So it's really taking our kind of big meta value and then breaking it up into those three different ways of, how does it make sense to me? How do I see it in my day-to-day workplace? And how do I stay accountable to it? And that's a really great way of building a D&I vision, because when we can do that for all of our values, we can actually just take that into a place where we're like, okay, so this is what it means for us at X company. So this is what DEI means for us at X company, because a vision is always going to be connected to what our values are. So hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you for that. And then I want to answer the question that came in through the Q&A. So it says, we're never going to get 100% participation with engagement. How do you suggest striving for higher participation and making sure events, initiatives, etc., are inclusive to everyone?
Definitely. So really fair question. And you're right. 100% participation with engagement is very, very hard to achieve. I think that employee engagement is really connected to that metric of, how are we making folks feel belonging within our organization, which I know can feel like a really, really big thing to be able to action upon. So I think it's breaking it up into different areas. So how do our employees feel engaged individually? So do employees feel like there's opportunities for them to grow professionally and for them to grow personally? So maybe, do they have those conversations with managers? Are there opportunities for those leadership open door days, which could be, via Slack, it could be via Zoom, where they can actually have that FaceTime with leaders. They feel like they're engaging in their organization. Do employees feel engaged interpersonally? So can employees actually connect with their teammates? Are there mechanisms for collaboration? I talked about Slack, but let's go past that. Are there channels where folks can input on things that are important to them? I know for me, like, I love just sharing random things that I watched. I'm like a big TV person. So a way that I feel engaged with my employees is saying, hey, did y'all see the new Abercrombie documentary? I A, feel old, and B, it is crazy how much went down in that organization, connecting to D&I and just generally. So having those opportunities for folks to share, not only the personal team day-to-day collaboration, but also be able to share things in their personal lives. Having a pet channel where folks can share that as well, super easy. And then really thinking of those events that you talked about. So do folks have the opportunity to engage with their wider team? Are there organized events, happy hours, so to speak, that don't have to be centered around alcohol, but can be centered around bingo, trivia, things like this, where we can actually come all together and get a chance to meet people from the broader organization? And then third, do employees feel like they can engage with the organization? So that's thinking of the structural and organizational level. So do they actually understand the vision? Does it make sense? Is that actually communicated out to employees? I know that was something that I talked to a lot of organizations about. They're like, I feel like employees don't get what we're doing with D&I. They don't think that we're doing anything. And I'm like, well, have you communicated what the vision is to them? Have you communicated why it's significant, why it's connected to their day-to-day roles, like we talked about before, and those kind of ways of working? So really taking those small opportunities at each level, the individual level, the interpersonal level, and the organizational level, for just those little bits where we can engage the employee for those different things.
Yeah. And I'd like, I want to also add like, for the events and stuff as well, is like making it, if you're a distributed or remote organization, making it have the two components of not everyone's going to be able to join live at these events. So also making it asynchronous. So if you're going to be doing like a cooking class or whatever it looks like, that those people who can't join at that time because of time zones or flexible works or just picking up their kids from school or whatnot, that they can participate later on, and also including that into that participation engagement of like, just because they weren't there live doesn't mean that they didn't get to participate a little bit later on because you allowed people to do it asynchronously. That's
a really great point, Noah.
That comes from Sean over at Wavy, not mine at all. There's a great point from the founder over at Wavy, and because this is what they do and this is what they talk about, of like, your events don't always have to be live. Make sure that people can engage in their own time as well, because everyone has their own initiatives, like we talked about earlier, of like having those flexible work schedules is really, really important for a lot of people who have kids, or they're caring for family members, or they're a student and so they're also taking courses on the side, or whatever it might be, whatever their sort of responsibilities are. You got to make things flexible for them, and that also includes your engagement, the way you engage your teams as well. There's another.
Oh, sorry. No, I was just curious, like, not to like throw this question to you as well, but I'm super, I'm being put in the hot seat, but I also want to learn some stuff for you. Was there any engagement tactics for you that you felt were particularly like meaningful that you've had a chance to do here at Gusto or any point in your career?
Yeah, I'm glad. Like, I'm always happy to answer questions too.
Reverse,
yeah, there we go. Nice. I'd say one of the things that we've found to be the most successful are the most unstructured events that we have. We just call them like, not even happy hours. We just do it at the end of our all hands meeting. There's 10 minutes. And we literally just do random breakout rooms with the whole organization. And are like, the topics are like, what'd you do on the weekend? What's an interesting book that you read that you want people to talk about? What show are you binging on Netflix right now? And the feedback we've gotten is that those types of events where they just get that chat with like actual kind of water cooler moments are the ones that are having the most impact on feeling connected and building community within our organization. And so because it's ongoing, it's every week. People who can't make it one week don't feel left out because they'll know they'll get to do it the next week. And because it's already in everyone's calendar, and it's just like, it's baked into our all hands meeting. It's not an extra 15 minutes afterward. It's literally like, we need to get through all of our team updates and then go do our breakout sessions together and have fun and chat with each other. That's the one, and that team meeting's sort of set so that everyone can join it regardless of their time zone. So it's kind of like, that's the thing that we have found to be pretty successful at our organization. And I will say we're experimenting with other stuff. So check back in 6 months.
That's really exciting though. And you said that you have weekly all hands for the
Correct.
team.
Yeah.
Awesome. So even that cadence, how's that been for everyone?
I think it's good. I know there's always people who are like, this feels like a little much, but it's one of those things where it's like, we're trying to be as transparent as possible. Everyone shares their metrics. We talk about updates, and sometimes there's no update. Sometimes the update is like, still working on this thing. Here's the new policy. Here's the new person we hired. That's the HR update for the week. And then sometimes the update is like, there's been a massive product release and here's all the details. So it's a nice way to kind of keep everyone accountable, because everyone has to show their metrics at the all hands meeting, and then talk about what their projects are that week.
That's really cool. Noah mentioned the no update to me, like when we first talked, and now I've been seeing it like everywhere. When I opened LinkedIn, I saw 2 posts that talked about it, and I was like, Noah mentioned it to me first.
Also, again, to be fair, not from me. I got that from the VP of talent at Retool. She was the one that put me onto that little tidbit of gold. So I'm just taking it in from anywhere I can and learning as much as I can from other awesome people. And if I can share that out with other people, great. But yeah, it's one of my favorites, the no update.
That's awesome. Sorry, you're gonna say another question.
Yeah, no, great. I love these. This is why we have these candid conversations, and so we can just have these off the cuff kind of questions, and I hope that kind of keeps it going. Quickly, Robin, yes, our all hands meeting includes non-leadership. It's the entire organization that shows up. So all 53 of us, whenever we can, shows up to that meeting. Yes, it's very expensive, but we think it's worth it. So this one comes from Melissa from Codename of, do you have any suggestions or preferences about having a work group to lead the initiative of DEI, or have it driven from an executive level with only seeking input from the team? How do you kind of balance those things? Do you have like a committee, or is it executive driven?
That is the same answer I have when I do online shopping, which is why not both? So I think really the key there is definitely having a group of engaged or invested team members who are, whatever language we'd like to use, a task force and affinity group, because I think it's really important that those folks get a chance to have that input, be able to know, because they're closer to the ground, so to speak. They're working within different teams, which are going to have nuanced different experiences throughout. And then there should also be a steering committee. So I think it's really beneficial to have that working group, that task force that's actually really pulling together. What are we hearing? What are the things that we're really trying to action on? How are we strategizing some of these pieces that are really relevant? And then having that steering committee to really, again, hold it accountable, to really help build these things, to make sure that that messaging is getting to the entire organization, and to also make sure that there's that investment upon it, right? Because some things do need investment and some things need some money to move forward when we're thinking about inclusion. So I think it's really important to have a group of leaders who are invested in D&I, invested in those initiatives, but then also having team members who are empowered to move those things forward and to keep gaining that input outside of just, maybe like a bi-yearly D&I survey.
That's awesome. I can't remember what organization it was, but I was talking to somebody, and the way that they had structured it was like you said, they had a committee or task force or kind of whatever you want to label it. And then every quarter, the executive member changed. And so it wasn't just run by one executive. So every quarter, the CSO, the chief sales officer, was there. And then the next quarter was the CMO. And the next quarter was the CEO. And so they were accountable to this task force every quarter, and it changed. And so, they had to come in, they had to learn what was going on, they had to learn how they could help, and they then had to learn what their role within that task force was. They weren't there to lead it, they were there to be the executive, to then take what was happening and report it to the rest of the executive team, sort of on a monthly update, which I thought was really interesting and really cool, because so often it's just like, well, the CPO or the CHRO will be the executive sponsor on the task force, and just kind of falls into the HR realm. But I like this rotation of responsibility across the entire executive team.
I think that's really cool, because that also shows the significance of it, like from the ELT, the executive leadership team level. And I think that that's really important when we think of positionality as well. I've been doing quite a few allyship trainings, and that's one of the key elements we talk about, how our position in the organization actually really influences how we can be allies, how we can move D&I forward based on these different levels, of privilege, of, like I mentioned, influence. So when you're a leader, you're in this actually really great position to be able to move things along, to be able to communicate, to be able to show the significance of an initiative, just based on the fact that you are in that position of power. So it's really, really important that leaders do take that accountability and really understand their power to be able to move things along, and their accountability in being able to do that, because teams will get fatigued. We see this all the time. There's one task force, like they're trying to push things out, and it's really hard because they just don't have that investment. And again, they don't have the influence always to be able to move things forward. So I think that is a really, really great example of how leadership can stand up and really take some of that, take some of the brunt of that, and really make sure we're communicating out, make sure that these things are really being invested upon, for sure.
We got another question that just came in. What are your thoughts on diverse employee resource groups? Yay or nay?
Interesting. So this is kind of what I'm talking about when I say affinity groups. I think it's really important for folks who have maybe similar experiences to be able to connect on that, because I do think that no equity deserving group is a monolith, aka like, people aren't going to come together and be like, we're all feeling this exact same thing. But I think that it's really important that they have the space to be able to do so with that safety. And sometimes that safety just comes from being with people who look like you, or perhaps who have similar lived experience to you. So am I opposed or agreeing with employee resource groups? I think that they're a really great way for people to be able to connect on different things. What, again, I think is more important is that it's not just going out into the void. Sometimes employee resource groups come together and they're like, man, there's this really big issue that we're dealing with. And then they just only have each other to talk amongst it, and it doesn't actually get actioned upon. So again, making sure that there's that connection. Is there a steering committee, a task force that they can actually come together, say, what is this issue that we're dealing with, and it actually go to somewhere where we can start building some steps around it to make sure that these things are resolved and that their input is valued.
Amazing. Awesome. What are your thoughts on compensation for your steering committee for DEI? Because I know, like you said, it's a tough job. People get burnt out. What are your thoughts on, like, if someone's joining this committee and putting in this extra work, because it is extra work and it takes away from some of their other things. What are your thoughts around compensating for that? Because I know a lot of the times it's not compensated, and people get very burnt out about it. Guidelines, thoughts, what do you think?
Hot button topic. So I mean, if you talk to outside of work, Brooke, I would say compensate everyone for work that is not work. But if you talk to more pragmatic Brooke, I think here's what I believe, that if inclusion is going to be a value for your company, if it is something that you are being accountable to, then it should be included in employees' performance reviews, because it is something that you are measuring upon and that you are trying to achieve. So by that aspect, I think that compensation looks different. So perhaps it's that, employees who are part of this group, that they are scoring in like the fourth quartile for this, because they're the ones who are acting upon it. They're actively contributing to the inclusion in the organization, etc. And there should be, whether that's a bonus, whether like whatever that looks like in the organization, I think it needs to be reflected as some kind of reward, as some kind of deep connection to say that like this is an actual performance metric that is important to us. So that's the middle ground that I would say, because I know that every single organization is not going to be able to compensate their entire task force, but they need to acknowledge it in a way that is tangible. It needs to be in an employee review. I know that there are some, for example, leaders that are actually tying compensation to different diversity inclusion metrics. Perhaps it's within representation, perhaps it's within the actual inclusion metrics, but I think that needs to also go down to team members that may not be at the leadership level, but that are actively contributing to the goals of an inclusive culture within their organization.
That's awesome. And then like building into your competency framework and your career pathways and all that kind of good stuff, and including it at all levels of the organization, whether you're a junior software developer or the VP of finance.
Totally.
I love it. We got another question in here. How do we encourage leadership to participate in the development of DEI goals? I'm being tasked with coming up with our goals, although we haven't been given a budget to conduct a survey, nor the commitment to actually follow through with addressing the results of the survey. How do you get leadership to come behind you?
So I'll say like my Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde type thing. So one side of me is saying that if your leadership is not invested, there is a big problem there, right? Like there needs to be a business case, of course. Like I do think that is very common, but if you have built the business case, if you have some data around, maybe, it's just a survey monkey to start with, like to get some of those things. And if your leadership is still not invested in making some changes, then that is like a way bigger organizational problem, in which case I'm not going to say get out, but and then there's the second side of me that's saying, really making sure, again, data doesn't lie. It never lies. So really starting to build those small things, like I say, like, getting those numbers. So thinking about the informational. So that's really, what is representation looking like in our organization, just from a number standpoint. And then kind of like the experiences. So, maybe it's just saying like from 1 to 10 or from 1 to 5 rather, do you feel like you belong in the organization? From 1 to 5, do you feel connected to our organization's vision and values? Even just those 2 questions can really give us an overview of how our employees are feeling engaged to the organization and how they may feel inclusion in the organization. And if you show that to your leadership, they should be able to then see that either we're doing something well, our employees are engaged, we're feeling an inclusive culture. How do we keep this? Because it doesn't just happen naturally, right? We need to create some frameworks around how do we actually fortify this to make sure that we can maintain this inclusive culture, this engagement with our employees. And then if it's something to work on, that is an immediate indicator, because like I just said, data doesn't lie, that we need to create some strategies around it. There needs to be some budget here. And maybe it's, doing the research to get some suggestions. There's some really great, and I'll try to share them in this group, but there's some really great starters on, how do we start building D&I at our organization in the financial industry? Diversio has built one, but there's so many nuanced industries of where you can start with some of those small initiatives. But I really do think that leadership, more than anyone, has an accountability to inclusion and diversity. And if they see the data and if they say it's not a priority, then to me that is going to be a huge indicator of, profitability, of productivity, and really just the growth of an organization. Because we know now, we've seen bajillion case studies, that it's just not sustainable to have an organization that does not prioritize diversity and inclusion. So I hope that was helpful.
I mean, I think it, like you said, like data doesn't lie, and I think having I think that our people teams and HR teams have a problem where we fall into this pattern where we don't hold ourselves to the same rigor and accountability that like the business side of a company does, where they have their rituals and their metrics. Like look at finance teams, sales teams, marketing teams, engineering teams. They all have point systems and goals that they have to achieve, either sales or leads or whatever. The people team, we have to do the same thing on the same side of like creating metrics and goals and tracking data, so that we can then have the same rigor and process that the other side of the organization has. And that should help bring any leadership kind of along for the ride, because they'll see the numbers in the data, like you said, of like, oh, if we don't do this, these numbers are going to go down, which affects finances numbers, because we're going to have to hire 10 new people just to replace all of the churn that we're going to have, and so on and so forth.
And it does take time for sure. Like I know that it is far harder in the human sphere, which is qualitative by nature, to get quantitative outputs. But there is tactics around this. When we think about representation, perhaps your KPI is, what is the percentage of equity deserving groups who are above the director level in my organization? That 1 percentage point says a lot about the organization and some of the ways that it can grow, right? And that's not too hard to be able to start getting that data. Perhaps it's just a demographic survey, anonymous to start, where folks can do this, acknowledging that some folks may say prefer not to say, depending on the safety and the trust of the organization. But again, we're level setting for that. On the inclusion side, again, like I said, using our Likert scale. So, from a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being not at all, or 1 being not at all, 5 being completely, do you feel like you are free from harassment in your workplace? That gives us a really great idea of where we're standing in that metric of safety, right? from a scale of 1 to 5, do you feel like there is someone who is invested in your professional growth? Like, these are ways that we can start getting some tangible numbers that are attached to it. And this is what Diversio believes, and what we've really tried to do very well within our dashboard is have that connection of diversity data. So really thinking about who's in the organization, and then inclusion data, really thinking about what are those nuanced experiences of folks within our organization, and then how do we benchmark it? So really making sure we have a comparison point as well. Maybe that's by industry, maybe that's by size of organization, but really making sure that we also are able to have a baseline to know where to move to as well.
Awesome. We're getting to like the very end of this webinar. We have a couple minutes left. We got one more question, so let's answer this last question, and then I think we'll probably kind of wrap things up there. But just advice on DEI within a fully remote culture where people only see each other virtually. How do you, anything different you would do other than sort of what you've already been kind of talking about, or key things that you need to consider when it comes to remote culture and DEI?
So I want to hear your opinion on this as well, no, but I'll go first. And one of them, and it's actually, I'll share the link in the chat as well, but it's from this organizational strategist. Her last name is escaping me, but I know her first name is Patty. And she talks about treating folks like adults. So this concept, because think about previously to the pandemic when folks had to check in, in their office, we had to be physically there. We had to walk around, like people would check, but now we're really having this opportunity to be able to balance this autonomy, this accountability to our work, and the trust of our superiors or our direct reports that it's getting done. So it's really not about, it's not about when the work gets done, it's about how it gets done and that quality. So I think that this is what I think about D&I when we're thinking about that metric of workplace flexibility. It's really allowing folks to be adults and putting in mechanisms for communication and collaboration, but not for scrutiny and for micromanaging. So these are some of the things that I'm really trying to think about as folks start to let go of some of the more conventional ways we thought about ways of working, and moving forward into this remote space where, I can be in Ontario and Noah can be in BC, but we don't need to have this constant supervision of our work because we know how we have the communication to know what is good work, how we do it, and we have the tools, the resources to be able to achieve and accomplish that good work. So that's just one metric that I'm going to talk about in this case. Noah, how about you?
I mean, I love the concept of treating people like adults. I think it's just like instilling trust within the team and the organization, I think is really, really huge. And then transparency, I think, is a big part of that as an organization, because if you can't be transparent with the information and where you're going as an organization and what other teams are working on, people can't work effectively remotely because they're going to have to constantly be checking in, or there's going to be strange overlap. Because if I know what product is doing and product knows what marketing is doing and marketing knows what I'm doing, we all understand how we're achieving towards the singular goal, which is the company becoming, more successful. And so creating that transparency around what the organization is trying to achieve, what their goals are quarterly or annually, and how every team sort of like funneling up to those goals, I think is a huge thing that you can do to empower people to have that trust and get their work done, and then allows for the flexible sort of work situation that allows people with different needs, different life responsibilities, families, aging parents, sick relatives, whatever you want to call it, to still be effective, because maybe they're doing a couple hours of work early in the morning, a couple hours in the work during a kid's nap, and a couple hours of work at evening. But because they know exactly what's happening at any given time, they can still be effective without having to have synchronous communication with people all the time. So I think that transparency and that trust are really, really important.
That is so key. And when you have a chance, that video that I put in the chat, it's really great. I use it in a lot of my trainings on workplace flexibility, and it's Patty McCord, that's her name. And it's such a great video, about 8 minutes long, and really talks about exactly what Noah just said, that transparency piece, where folks know, what is everyone working on? So I actually know what we're working towards. And then that piece that I was talking about, and Patty says it like blatantly. She's like, treat people like adults, and really understanding like that communication is the key, not surveillance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's I love that mentality of just like, let's treat people like they're an adult and they can do their job. And when you do that, people will all, like 99% of the time, step up to that level of trust and figure that you're putting in front of them. We have one more question about visiting places in Canada. I don't know. You can't go wrong going to Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, Victoria. They're all great places. If I've missed something, throw it in chat if you're in Canada right now. But we are at time. And so I want to respect everyone who's joined us on this webinar. I want to respect Brooke's time. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Brooke, for all of the amazing insights. I really appreciate it. We'll send out that YouTube link in the post-event newsletter. And Brooke, if you have any other resources that you think we should be sharing out, we'll send those out in the newsletter as well. But thanks everybody for joining us. Thank you, Brooke, for joining us. Really appreciate your time. And we'll see you next time. And as always, the recording will also be shared. And so you can share that with anyone who wasn't able to make it today.
Thanks so much, everyone. And also don't forget about the territories. Whitehorse is beautiful. So that's a place you can visit as well.
That's true. Yellowknife. I have a friend up in the Yellowknife.
Yes, exactly.
Amazing place. Okay. Thanks,
Have
everybody.
a great one, everyone. Thank you so much for your time.